Uh, Thank you very much. I would like to say that I am delighted to speak and to open this very important forum by the Indic Researchers Group, by Yashash and the other colleagues, for the simple reason that you're discussing a very, very important subject. Except that I will make a small amendment in what you're saying. It's not the beginning of a new world order. It is what is happening is the existential battle that is going to determine the new world order. I don't think that battle has been won yet. And once it is won, and I'm certain that that is going to happen in a manner that we in India will welcome, then of course we will be beginning the work of the new world order. And I think the Indic Researchers Forum would do well to, at that point, also go ahead for a major, if I may say so, conference of this nature. I'd like to say that I'm totally honored to be allowed to speak to you for the simple reason there are some extremely distinguished participants on this panel, on the various panels, and they have a galaxy of experience and talent in the subject. So I'm going to be somewhat brief, if you don't mind, because I would not like to be in between such a galaxy of talent and those who are eager to listen to them. Well, I want to point out the obvious. And the obvious is that the Indo-Pacific today is a geopolitical, it is a geopolitical hub replacing the Atlantic. This was taking place ever since the 1980s, frankly, ever since the development of countries in Asia, particularly. And it accelerated in the 1990s. And I think by the close of the 1990s, I think it was clear that if the Indo-Pacific was not already the geopolitical center of gravity so far as the oceans are concerned, it is soon going to be. So that is something which I know everybody here knows by heart virtually. So I'm sorry to have to repeat it, but I just want to repeat in the context of my previous point, which is that what we are seeing today is a battle for the beginnings, for what will be the beginnings of a new order in the Indo-Pacific. It's an existential battle. Now, I've had the good fortune or the bad fortune of looking at events and giving certain forecasts, only to have those forecasts, frankly, dismissed as slightly imaginary, and then maybe after about 5 years, be considered that possibly it's realistic. And 10 years later, people come back to me and say, this is what is happening. And they repeat my forecast of 10 years ago. So I'd only like to say that, it's good luck or bad luck. But I'd like to say that as of now, I can tell you, and I'm saying this with a certain degree of dismay, I cannot yet forecast who is going to be the winner in this existential battle. Certainly, in terms of comprehensive national power, the democracies have the upper hand. Certainly, in terms of talent, in terms of potential, especially our own country with its immense demographic potential, well, obviously, the democracies have the upper hand. But the point is that these kind of conflicts that determine the shape of the new world order, the 1945, the war which ended in 1945, determined the shape of the new world order. There was Bretton Woods, there was the American, if I may say so, the Cold War with the Soviet Union going into Eastern Europe, that defined those contours for a long, long time to come. Subsequently, well, this began, I would say, with the second, the second term of Hu Jintao. But Hu Jintao was he was very careful. He followed Deng Xiaoping's dictum or speaks softly, but carry a big stick and make that stick bigger and more powerful as you go along. And he did that. But today, if I may say so, all camouflage is off. There is no camouflage. Xi Jinping has frankly torn up, for example, if I may say so, the 1981 party plenum organized by Deng Xiaoping, in which it was said that Mao made 30% mistakes and 70% he was correct. I'm not sure if that should not be reversed. But Xi Jinping has very absolutely categorically said that Mao made no mistake at all. I mean, I'm not very sure why he has said that, because he has rehabilitated Confucius, for example. In several ways, he's quite different from Mao. But he says there was absolutely nothing wrong with Mao, and Maoism was great. I think he has been badly burnt, frankly, by the Khrushchev secret speech and by the fall in the respect for the Soviet Union, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, as a consequence of Khrushchev's secret speech being leaked to a very large Russian audience. So they realized that Stalin was a colossus with feet of clay. Xi Jinping does not want Mao to be acknowledged as a colossus with even 30%, who is even 30% composed of clay. So he has said, no, this is absolute steel or titanium, 100%. Look, I would only like to say that we have absolutely the top brains in the country where military policy is concerned, and I'm sure that the researchers here are doing an amazing amount of work on coming up with new hypotheses. And I'd like to encourage you to go ahead with new hypotheses, because frankly, many of the old hypotheses have just not been working and they should be discontinued. But unfortunately, policies, hypotheses, academic discussions, we don't have an expiry date. So they are talked about, they are disseminated, they are, decisions are taken on their basis long past the expiry date. One of them being the reality that it's high time, for example, that the uniformed services are integrated into the Ministry of Defense, and the security services are integrated into the Ministry of Home Affairs. Now, the External Affairs Ministry has formed a cadre of its own foreign policy. It served us well. You have, for example, the Atomic Energy Department. You have, for example, the Space Department. Both of them are led by experts. Experts are the secretaries, not generalist officers. And pardon me for saying so, but I think it's not rocket science. ISRO would like this to say that these are departments that have done very well. And therefore, I believe that this experiment needs to be tried out on a large scale, as indeed it is being tried out in so many democracies across the world. Long past the expiry date, we are continuing with a host of such policies. And why am I saying this? I'm saying this to this distinguished audience because wars are not necessarily won by weakness on the part of the enemy or by the enemy having less power or less ability than our side. Wars can also be won by, wars can be made by mistakes, and wars can be won or lost by errors on our side. Let's say we make errors, then a war that can be won can be lost. And if the other side, now we have Cold War 2.0, the US is basically front and center on one side, democracy is front and center on one side, and you have authoritarianism represented by China, the two superpowers. Now, the question is really, and I've seen this happen, for example, in many tennis matches, the player who makes the least mistakes comes out and wins the match. In a chess game, the player who makes the least mistakes comes out and wins the match. He may be a lucky player, but whatever the reason, if the opponent makes a lot of mistakes, he makes less mistakes, well, the match goes to him or her, I'd like to say. And I'd like to, so that is my point very clearly. And that's why I hope that this conference is going to examine these things in detail in a very comprehensive manner so that we can understand what is going right with us, what is going wrong with us, what needs to be changed. Because this is the era of both threat as well as opportunity. And again, I'm telling you something which is fairly obvious to everybody. I'm sorry if I'm repeating this, but if you invite a professor, well, sometimes he repeats the lectures that he has given, and sometimes the same student attends the lecture. Well, you can see the student being a little less attentive, and then you can understand he's heard this lecture before. But I'd only like to say We are at a point of inflection in the history of our country. Forget the history of our country. The Indo-Pacific, which is today the geopolitical center of sea power, just as the Eurasian continent is the center of land power. Now, this has now become the pivot of geopolitics, and it is now at an inflectional point as to which set of countries is going to come out on top in this battle for primacy initially and then dominance. Make no mistake, it is an existential battle. The Cold War 1.1 was fought on the basis of it being an existential battle of objectives and systems. Well, I'd like to ask in what way this is not an existential battle of objectives and systems. Because in Xi Jinping thought, and I'd like to say that I've studied Mao Zedong's thought. I mean, I know that I can't be called an expert in that, I'm sure, but the reality is I've studied it in detail. Some of my old friends in China believe that, okay, I know quite a bit about it, and they, I mean, either, real or not. But the reality is that I've also studied Xi Jinping's thought. And once Xi Jinping, 2013, 2014, 2015, once these years we saw what he was doing, a lot of the earlier speeches, a lot of the earlier writings that frankly all of us really never bothered to think about have suddenly emerged very relevant. It reminds me of the Arab Spring, when I pointed out that the Arab Spring is going to be followed by a Wahhabi winter. And lo and behold, a lot of that Wahhabi winter was funded from NATO and the Western allies, because they didn't read the if I may say so, the pre-romance, fulminations of those they were funding. If they read, for example, some of the so-called freedom fighters they were funding in Syria, in Libya, they would have found out that these freedom fighters regard the West as the existential enemy more deadly than any other enemy. So, unfortunately, they did not read that. Vast amounts of money were transferred to them, weapons and training was transferred to them, and we have had a rash of terror attacks, which is still continuing as a consequence of that, and some other decisions that were made in the past, such as trusting the Pakistan military to fight the very unfortunate, unpleasant, and unjust Soviet invasion and occupation of Afghanistan, but not doing that with patriotic nationalist Pashtuns, but doing that with extremist Pashtuns. The nationalist Pashtun is anathema to the Pakistan military. The nationalist Pashtun is the individual who could have defeated the Russians much quicker than what these extremist Pashtuns did. And that menace is now still on us, as you can see. I'd like to end, Sneha, by coming back to something I wrote back in the early 90s, if I'm not mistaken, in the Times of India. And that's called Hindutva. And my point there was again a point which possibly is very obvious to a lot of people, but I'd like to say at least the Times of India, nobody carried it that kind of view except that first time. What is Hindutva? Hindutva says that Indian culture, the DNA of Indian culture, is a compound of the Vedic, the Mughal, and the Western. All three are parts of that DNA. It cannot be that any single part of these three parts is removed from the DNA, because they are all integrated like a helix into our cultural DNA. By whatever faith we claim to go by, whatever ideology or belief systems, whatever our lifestyles, whatever our diet, and in my view, these are matters for the individual to decide, not the state, certainly not the police, nor moral police. I'd like to say very frankly that all three are valid. But what have we seen? I'm glad that the Indic Researchers Forum has taken up this kind of issue, because the problem we have in India is that we are still studying Indian history as though it is 500 years old, when it is at least 5,000 years old. Now, let us say, for example, that you observe, and I'd like to say that I have immense respect for our opponents on the other side of the Cold War, the Chinese. That's why I spent a lot of time studying them, and the Americans, whom, these two countries I've been studying from the 1980s. Somehow, at that, for a long time, people thought I was being a little, a little wrong in my choice of country where studying China was concerned. Today, I don't think anybody does that anymore. But the reality is, I think it was Mao Zedong who said, stand on the tall mountain. And if you stand on a tall mountain and you stand on the pavement, well, or if you stand on the top of the skyscraper, sorry, forget about mountains. We're all in cities. You stand on the top of the skyscraper or stand on the tall mountain, there's a big difference in what you see, what you understand, and your whole outlook. So we have to stand on the skyscraper of 5,000 years of Indic tradition and history. 5,000 years rather than just about 500 years. And that is something which I think is slowly happening. I'm glad it has been taking off in the regime that was inaugurated in 2014, headed by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. I'd like to say that it is very important. But again, remember, this has to be done in the context of understanding that all three segments are part of our DNA. The mistake that was made that only these 500 years are the DNA, the other 4,500 years is myth or rubbish, should not be replaced by saying that the final 500 years or the final whatever is 600 or so years was not of the same value as 4,500 years. 4,500 years, obviously, in terms of quantity, in terms of tradition, it is of value. I'd like to end by pointing out, Alexander is celebrated in Greece. Caesar is celebrated in Rome. He's celebrated by every Indian. He's not regarded, Caesar or Alexander are not regarded as religious figures. Alexander, by the way, was Macedonian, which is why the Greeks insisted that the Macedonians call their country North Macedonia. They wanted to ensure that the legacy of Alexander remained Greek. Well, we are given it to Greece. They got a huge tradition of philosophy and conquest under Alexander. But the point of the matter is, that Lord Ram, for example, the Ram Setu. I have personally experienced, and I do believe, and I think scientific evidence is there, that this is a bridge. Why are we so shy of saying that? Why are we so shy of acknowledging it as a national monument? Why are we so shy of saying that, no, these are all myths. These have all been created. I may be, I don't know, I'm not the most intelligent person on the planet, but I honestly believe Lord Ram existed. I honestly believe that there is a lot from the Vedic period that we can learn, irrespective of whether we're atheists or we believe in one faith or the other. It's of immense value. I have found the Torah. I found the Old Testament and the New Testament. I found the Quran of immense value. I would like to say of immense value. I found the Sikh faith to be of immense value. The Jain faith, I always wonder at my Jain friends, whenever a swarm of mosquitoes comes into my room and I use that bat-like, that tennis racket-like thing to try and finish them all. The Jains, sometimes the Jains are there when I do that. Some Jain friends are there and they're horrified. Well, thank God they don't seem to be getting malaria. But I'd only like to point out that this is important. 5,000 years of history, not 500, not 4,500. We have to go as a unified culture, a unified nation, a unified people, because that is now absolutely an imperative in this existential conflict. And we have to be clear what side we are on. We have to be very cold-bloodedly realistic about that. We cannot be romantic about that. We cannot be romantic about what countries were 20 years ago, or even some countries 20 months ago, what they are now, because the next 2 or 3 years will determine what happens in India. Do we grab the opportunities that Cold War 2.0 has provided? The manner in which China under Deng Xiaoping grabbed the opportunities of Cold War 1.0, or will we lose them for all time to come? The threats for at least 10, 12 years, we are going to be constantly under threat. It will take at least that long for a decision. I'd like to say, continue by add that I'm not sure about the decision. I think the balance of advantage is on our side, but I still cannot confidently predict that we are going to win because I don't know how many mistakes we are going to make, how many mistakes the other side is going to make, and mistakes besides, and what kind of policies. Because some of the policies I'm seeing in many countries that are that have to band together are not entirely the best policies for the kind of existential battle we are facing. So I'd like to sign off by once again expressing my gratitude to the Indic Forum for allowing me to open this particular conference with such distinguished participants, with such, if I may say so, brilliant participants. And I'd only like to say, I'm sure all of them realize we are in the battle of our lives. This is 1939, 1945. 1939 didn't begin in 1939. It began in 1929. All the signs were missed, and we had 1939. So that is why I'm saying 10, 12 years. We can't miss the signs once more, as so many countries did in the 20th century. India can't miss the signs. Certainly, our country cannot. And it is in that spirit that I encourage you to have this conference. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.